Next slide you see is the birth certificate of Jimmy James, again, who is the father to my grandfather, so my great-grandfather, born on January 14th, 1888. Again, I showed you this document before, straight out of the familytree.org website. Here it is. Name, Jimmy James. Highlighted in yellow is the father and mother, Wash James and Martha Samuel. Yo, what's going on, everyone? King here, back for another video. So in this video, I'm going to continue on with the conversation discussing my family tree and basically debunking that claim that Washington James fathered Joshua Samuels, who was one of the children, one of the first children of Martha Samuel. So I'm going to take this time to debunk that claim. Again, talk about my family tree and show the evidence that I discovered, information I discovered from doing my research on familytree.org, as well as what my family knew, members of my family, my grandmother, their children, and other cousins knew about the lineage of Washington James, as well as what was published in articles. Some of you may be seeing that in my other videos, but we're going to discuss that, and I'm going to show proof that Joshua Samuels is not the son of Washington James, even though individuals claim that he is one of the children of Washington James. And they claimed this during the Quattle action hearing that happened in November 2018. They had no evidence. It was basically their testimony. They did try to create a very basic, generic family tree, just listing names with no, birth dates and deaths, and it really wasn't very coherent and it wasn't put together very well to illustrate who were the parents and the grandparents and the grandchildren and children, so forth, so forth. So again, this was all during the Quattle action hearing, but now that we're past that, they're still claiming that they're heirs to Washington James, and I'm in the process of trying to resolve that. So as you saw from the text message that I received some months back, that it said that I couldn't prove that I'm a true heir to the estate, and that if Martha Samuels was a mother to Washington James' children, then that means I'm a Samuel. Never disputed that fact, but more so I'm a James. Now my Papa Jimmy, who was my grandfather's father, he's a Samuel because his mother is a Samuel. She comes from that line. He comes from that line, but also a James too. Now, Martha Samuel's name was not on the original deed, and she was not married to Washington James, so therefore, legally, she does not have any. She does not inherit the share from Washington James to the property. His children does, and we can get into that. I'm going to show proof of when a period of time was when Washington James' children went from the name Samuel to James, because that's also a factor too. That's also a statement that people have made. Well, you were Samuels, you were named Samuels first before you were James. True that, but doesn't, when it comes to the heirship of property, that does not have a factor, especially the two individuals are not married. Now you just talking about straight lineage, sure, by all means, but when it comes to heirs, or people being heirs to property, is very, the law is very strict as far as how you heir to property. Especially if the name was on the deed, the husband's name was on the deed, the wife's name was on the deed, then it does not matter. It goes by the husband's name, or whoever's name was on that deed is their children, or are going to be in that line of being heirs to property. But we can get into that. So take this time. We'll show the PowerPoint. Again, if you see my other video, I now leave a link in the descriptions below. But I built out my family tree using PowerPoint, and this information is based on information I discovered during my research on familysource.org, as well as other documents that my members of my families had. They already did their research prior to me, so I just took that information and built it out inside the website familysource.org, I just screenshot and put it in the PowerPoint. So I did not create this in PowerPoint. This is a screenshot from PowerPoint. Nonetheless, as you see that I have my family tree there. Again, this is, me going from me, tracing my lineage up to Washington James and Toby Cox. But in this video, I can focus solely on Washington James. So there's my family tree, right? So Washington James is my second great grandfather. He had a relationship with Martha Samuels. She gave birth to 7 of his children, one of which is Papa Jimmy, who is my grandfather's father, so my great grandfather. Papa Jimmy had children, one of which are Jake James Sr., right? And then from Jake James Sr., right, had a relationship with my grandmother, which is also Jake James Sr. and Hattie Brown James, or my grandparents, my mother's parents, and then there's me. So that's the lineage of Washington James. Now this is not including all of his children. I understand that, and I'm going to show who are his children, who are the other children, and as well as showing that Joshua Samuels is not the son of Washington James by documents, right? By presenting the information that was discovered on familyhistory.org. Okay, so this next slide you see here, right, really breaks it down in the form of text language, right? Putting pen on paper, putting words on paper, right? So here's his family tree. So this is based off, again, evidence. So you see that first bullet on the left hand side, it talks about the 1870 census report, right? I mentioned this before, that Washington James had his own household. He had his wife, his son Charlie, in 1870, and they in a report from 1817 to 1900s. They're on the census report, except for Charles James, or Charlie James, where he was not on the census report after 1880. Well, for that area, he might be somewhere else, but within the area of Marion County in South Carolina, Waukee Township, he does not appear on the census report after 1880. So at the time, Washington James was married to Cecil James. They had a son named Charles, right? But in around after 1870, he had a relationship with Martha Samuels. We know her to be his mistress, and she, based on that relationship, was a mother to some of his children. Again, there's a names there on the right hand side of the screen. They're not in order though, but my Papa Jimmy is in there. My grandfather's father's name was in there. And then from 1880, this is on the census report. So from 1880 to 1910, the census report shows that his children was living with their mother, except for Edmund James, who's the firstborn son of that relationship, was actually I think it was 1900s, was living with his father at the time, and by this time he's a grown man, nearly a grown man, because Charles was not living with his father and mother at the time. So in 1900, I believe Edmund James is on the census report as to be living with Washington James and his wife Cecilia James, and they actually had the name James that was annotated on the census report, because you remember that the line there where it says whoever the name is, they just put a line saying that they have the same last name unless the name changes. Because they annotate on there that, hey, in this household there was a Samuels, but these people here are named James in the same household. And I'll show that in a future slide. Okay, so again, there it is. Early reports, Mr. James's children were listed with the last name of Samuel. Due to them living with Martha Samuels, however, by 1900, his children took the last name of James. Emma James was living with his father, Washington James, his wife, Cecilia James, at the time of this report. Okay, this is all discovered on familyhistory.org. The documentation I've shown before, there's proof of it. And here's my sources, right? It's this report from 1870 to 1910, right? And there's other reports that goes back even to like 1940, 1950, 1960. But I'm going to focus solely on 1870 to 1910. And as well as other sources of information, death certificates of Edmund James, right? Jake James, which is his brother, right? So these two are my great uncle. My family refers to them as Big Uncle, or Edmund James as Big Uncle. Martha Samuels, who is my great-great-grandmother. Joshua Samuels, again, these are death certificates. I discovered their death certificates. But again, members of my family already had this information. I'm just, rediscovering it and using it as a source of information to prove or disprove, who are children of Washington James, who are not children of Washington James. Right? The birth certificate of Jimmy James, again, my grandfather's father, so my great-grandfather. Birth certificate. I showed you before in the last video, where him and his brother, went up to Marion County or wherever the case may be and got this birth certificate made. So, got this birth certificate made. So there's other public news sources too. We talked about this before. The Wash James and the Plantation Lands, right? This was published in July of 2011. So this is another good source of information to determine, the family tree, the lineage of Washington James. Well, not so much as Washington James, but other men and women that were listed on the original deed to the property. See, this next slide, again, I talked about evidence, death certificates, sister reports, and whatnot. So here are the two death certificates, right? One of Edmund James, who's the firstborn child of Washington James. It shows the day that he died, on February 2nd, 1964, as well as Jake James, who was his brother, right? Died in 1973. Right, I have the heirs highlighted, showing that their names, as well as showing their parents' names. Right, so father, Wash James; mother, Martha Samuels. On both documents, it says that Wash James, Martha Samuel. Where they were born, the year they were born, right, and where they died, all that. Again, proving who were the children of Washington James, but also proving that that Joshua Samuels is not the son of Washington James. Next slide you see is the birth certificate of Jimmy James, again, who is the father to my grandfather, so my great-grandfather, born in January 14th, 1888. Again, I showed you this document before, straight out of the familysearch.org website. Here it is. Name, Jimmy James. Highlighted in yellow is the father and mother, Wash James and Martha Samuel. Again, evidence of who are the children. They challenged me. I was challenged to say that I cannot prove that I'm a true heir to Washington James, as well as saying that would mean that I'm a Samuel too because of Martha Samuel. Never disputed that, but at the same time though, Martha Samuel didn't own this property. She wasn't part owner of this property, and she wasn't married to Washington James. So therefore, the Samuel line is not. Joshua Samuel is not an heir to this property. He does not have an interest in this property. That's probably the reason why Washington James, before his death, had his children take his name, James. And here it is, and Papa Jimmy making sure that he had a birth certificate that said that who his parents were for his children's sake. I can say that that's probably one of the reasons why, is to make sure that his children, there was evidence to show that who his parents were, for the sake of his children having rights to the property. Right, and it's also Papa Sim. So Papa Sim signed this, and Edmund James signed it as his mark. So Papa Sim being the grandfather to my grandmother, and Edmund James being the great uncle. Right, he's an uncle to my grandfather. He's my great uncle. Right. Okay, so next document you see on this slide here is a 1910 U.S. Census report showing that Martha Samuel and her children, the children of Washington James, resided in the same household. Right. This is just another version of that document, versus showing the original handwritten document. But this is what was transcribed from that information. So this is this is typed, either from typewriter or computer. But this document is produced from that. So again, it shows right there, highlighted in yellow, that Martha Samuels is the head of the household. Shows her age, right, and the children's name in the name of James. Again, and what's important about this document, this version of the document, that we use this document during the qualified action hearing. You see this is labeled, is stamped, Plaintiff's Exhibit number 10. This is a source document. This is proof, and the court accepted it. The judge that was presiding over the hearing accepted this as evidence to prove who we are, to prove that my family, that the children of Washington James are who they are, and that their children and their grandchildren are who they are, showing their lineage. You know, the individuals that said that Joshua Samuels was the son of one of the children of Washington James, they didn't provide no evidence other than just testimony. Again, they produced a document of some sort showing their lineage, their family tree, but it wasn't proven. It wasn't backed by this kind of evidence. Birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, census reports, on that stuff. It was just names on paper saying that, and I could do that. I can put a name on paper saying that I'm the son of Martin Luther King Jr., MLK Jr. But where's the proof of that? I can't say that because there's no evidence. And his family would know whether or not I am an heir descendant of MLK Jr. Just because I share the same last name doesn't mean that it's true. So moving on. Okay, this slide here is showing basically the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, if you understand that reference. But basically showing the relationship between Joshua Samuel and Washington James's children, right? Showing that they're family in a way, but they're not. Joshua Samuel is not blood related to Washington James, right? They share the same mother but different father. Again, left side of the slide here, the bullet points, we already covered that. You know, the information about Martha Samuels, Washington James, their children, and census reports, all that stuff. Right? So Washington James, Martha Samuels had 7 children together. They were not married. Okay? He was already married, had a wife, Cecilia James, and had a son from that marriage, Charlie James. Now, Martha Samuel had a relationship with a man, whoever that man is, who fathered Joshua Samuel. You know, on the right side of the slide, you will see Joshua Samuels first appeared on the 1880 census report. Now, again, he was 10 years old at the time, so you can say roughly he was born in 1870. But his death certificate does not state Washington James to be his father. It does list Martha Samuel as his mother, but again, we're showing other death certificates of Edmund James and Jake James. It lists their mother and father. Not in this case. It does not list his father for Joshua Samuels. Again, there's a source of information right there. Right? Everything I used to solidify that, hey, what my family knows or knew or was told is accurate or not accurate. Okay, so just like I showed the death certificates of Edmund James and Jake James, here is the death certificates of Martha Samuel, and I believe I showed this before. She died in 1915, and Joshua Samuels died in 1970. So nearly 2 years after his mother died. Right? Again, highlighted in yellow, it shows the county, Marion, township, Waihee for both documents. Full name, Martha Samuel. Full name, Joshua Samuel. Single for Martha Samuel. Right? Married for Joshua Samuel. Father of Martha Samuel, Edmund Samuel. Again, this is documented. This is on the census report as well as in an article that I'm going to show later on in this video. But the mother, Margaret Samuel, with that line, Margaret. Right? Let's go to Joshua Samuel. Mother. Right? It lists Martha Samuels, but father. That, whatever's written in that block, whether it be don't know, Dot Nolan, Doug Nolan, not whoever, does not say Washington James. And also what's something about these documents. These are copies of the actual documents that we used during the qualified action hearing in November 2018. You see that it's marked, just like the other document, Plaintiff's Exhibit 9 and 8. Again, the court accepted these documents. And their lawyer at the time did not object to it. Did he Did he appreciate these documents? No, because he made us think about that it was not presented during discovery, but yeah, plenty of opportunity for his clients to prepare and do their research, but they didn't. And even my lawyer, yeah, that's part for those stories, but I'll say this: my lawyer questioned the individual who said that she was the heir to Washington James by way of Joshua Samuels. Say, hey, did you do any preparation? Did you do any research? She said no. Again, I have the transcript to prove it. So, but that's for another probably for another video. But with that said, here it is. Again, I was challenged that I can't prove that I'm a true heir to property, and that that Joshua Samuels is the son of Washington James. It's all right here in a nutshell. It's fact, based on evidence. Right. So the thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to showing you more documentation. All right. Let's start with. Let's do it this way. Let's start with a paper documentation that was part of a 2011 lawsuit where individuals that claiming to have interest in the property sued members of my family over the heir property and mismanagement of property and other things. But so members of my family who were defendants in the case filed a counterclaim as well as produced questions, right? Sent questions to their lawyer for them to answer. Now, these individuals were plaintiffs in the case. The lawyer representing them received these questions, and as you see on the screen there, one of the questions was number 8, where each plaintiff stated whether or not the plaintiff claims any interest in the property referred to as Washington James land in the complaint. For each plaintiff who claims an interest in the real property that is subject to of this action, describe in detail the nature of such interest, how such interest arose, including any limitation linked to the original owners of the property. Answer: the plaintiffs claim interest in the real property referred to as Washington James in the complaint. The nature of the interest arose from such. So these individuals that were suing members of my family listed their interest in the property by way of the original owners, right, on the deed. I'm going to focus on the individuals that says Samuels or Samuel. So it's listing the Samuel lineage, but nowhere in here does it say Washington James. You can scroll through, right? This one here, right? Mary Samuels, grandmother, Tim Samuels, equals Laura Samuels, equals Listen Samuels. The same thing, Mary Samuels, Tim Samuels, Laura Samuels, Listen Samuels. This individual didn't provide any kind of lineage information. Feeney Samuels, George General, Mary Samuels, equals Tim and Laura Samuels. Feeney Samuels, George General, Mary Samuels, Tim Samuels. Right here, but right here, these bottom two individuals list Joshua Samuels. But it says Tim and Laura Samuels. But if Joshua Samuels was the son of Martha Samuels, why is it not listed on here? It's not listed on here. Nowhere does it say that Joshua Samuels is the son of Martha Samuels. It says Joshua Samuels equals Listen Samuels, Tim Samuels, Mary Samuels, or in some cases, Tim and Laura Samuels, Mary Samuels. Now, if you remember back from another video, maybe I covered it or not, I can't remember, that Tim and Laura Samuels are siblings to Martha Samuels. So you mean tell me Tim and Laura Samuels had relations and produced their line of Samuels? They were not. That's not true. And now I'm gonna show proof. So go to this article. All right, showing this article 4. This is the PDQ. Right, this talks about Washington James and Washington James and the plantation lands and how it came to be. So I'm gonna scroll down to this page here, page 3 it is, and it talks about Washington James when he was born, when he died, what was his age, his family, right? Who was the who he had relationships with. So it says Washington is said to have married Martha Samuels. Not true, right? A sister of Laura Samuel. Right? It talks about he was married. He had his wife Seal James. Right? Mentioned right there, Edmund James, Charlie. Right? And then it says in Emma's household, which is her father, where his wife Margaret, you remember from the from death certificate, the name Edmund Samuels and Margaret. Here it is, right here. Edmund, his wife Margaret, and living with them was his mother Judy, and several children, including Timothy, Joshua, daughter Martha, and some grandchildren. So again, Timothy, Tim Samuel, Joshua, Josh Samuel, Martha, Martha Samuel, and then her children. It's all right here. And there it is. Again, I was challenged, right, to say that Washington James is the father of Joshua Samuels, but it's not. He's not the father. He was not the father. They don't have claims to their property, but they came to court making that claim, testifying to that on the witness stand, under oath. But I don't know what I'm talking about, though, right? I'm going to show one last document here. I'm going to wrap this up. So this is a transcript from the deposition of one of the individuals who actually said that she is the descendant of Joshua Samuels by way of Washington James. And so during her deposition, my lawyer questioned her, right? He questioned her twice. He questioned her during her deposition, and he questioned her during trial, right? So we already had the answer. We already knew what she was going to say. We already knew that. We already knew. But let's look at it. Okay, so let's look at page 11, the lower right-hand corner block there. Question. Maybe you can see it. Maybe I'm scrolling a little bit. Do you believe that you're an ancestor or heir to either Washington James or Toby Cox? Her answer, yes. Question. Can you explain that family tree to me? Her answer, Toby Cox family tree? My lawyer. Question. Or however you believe you're related, however you believe you're related to one of those. How is that? Answer. Washington James and Martha Samuels has a son named Joshua Samuels. I'm a direct descendant of Joshua Samuels. Question. Joshua Samuels is whose son again? I'm sorry. Answer. Washington James and Martha Samuel. So let's go to page 12. Question. If I actually draw out the family tree, or how is that you're related to Washington James, as you just spoke about his son and you said you're a direct descendant, would you be able to go through each level of the family tree, describe that, or could you lay that out, so to speak? Answer. Not off the top of my head, I couldn't. But so if I asked you how I relate to Washington James or Toby Cox, you would say that you're a direct descendant of Washington James's son. Answer. Yes. Again, there it is. There it is. She did not do the legwork. She did not properly, right, explain or answer how she came to be heir to Washington James, or if she's the heir to Washington James. She doesn't even know her family tree, her full family tree. And when she went to court, to provide no evidence, she didn't have one piece of paper spelling out how Joshua Samuels was the heir to Washington James. Not one. No documentation. Just their testimony and names on paper. In some cases, they didn't have it. Especially in the case of the lady that was exposed. Again, she showed up to court the day of the court action hearing with no evidence, no preparation. Again, I have transcripts to prove it. And the members of the family did the exact same thing. They put names on paper, but nothing to support it. No birth certificates, death certificates, marriage license, census reports, anything showing that Joshua Samuels was a son of Washington James, or how they were heirs to Washington James or other individuals named on the original deed. Didn't do it. But that's in a nutshell. That's, again, I was challenged that I can't prove I'm a true heir, and Martha Samuels was the mother of Washington James' children. That means I'm a Samuels, and that Joshua Samuels was a son of Washington James. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do, and my family knows. There's evidence. So, anyways, I thank you for watching the video. Hope it was entertaining as well as educational. And see you in the next video. Thank you. Take care. Bye.